Those of you who know me won't be in the least surprised to hear that what I've been working on during lockdown has been about money. In particular, the earnings of the men, and apologies now, they are all men, who worked in professional London theatre at the turn of the 16th and 17th centuries. These include not only the players and their backstage and front of house staff, but also the owners of the playhouses. My principal cast members are Philipp Henslow, owner of the Rose, who has left us the most detail we have about the operation of commercial theatre in this period in his day book, generally known as Henslow's Diary. Then there's his son-in-law, Edward Alleyn, the star of The Admiral's Men and creator of Marlowe's great characters, with whom Henslow built and co-owned The Fortune. Their friendly rivals at the Globe, the Chamberlain's Men, are represented by the brothers Burbage, Richard, their leading player, and his elder brother Cuthbert, plus their writer-in-residence, William Shakespeare, and their closest colleague, John Hemmings, stalwart player and business manager. In order to attempt to calculate what any of them may have earned, it's been necessary first to try to work out the capacities of their playhouses, the Rose, the Fortune and the Globe, both in terms of the numbers of people each held and also how much money each could take at a single performance. Then, using some of the calendar details from Henslow's diary and a sprinkling of common sense, it's possible to arrive at a seasonal or annual playing pattern. From there, it's a relatively straightforward mathematical exercise to work out who earned what, from the building owner to the front of house attendants. So, to start with the capacities of the Rose Playhouse. Originally built by Henslow in 1587, the Rose underwent substantial changes in 1591 to improve the stage and increase seating capacity. We know this from an archaeological rescue dig in 1989, which uncovered enough of the footprint to estimate its overall shape and size, the precise dimensions of the stage and the yard for the groundlings, and where entrances were sited. Without giving you mind-numbing details of my calculations, and assuming it to have conformed to the usual pattern of 3 levels of gallery around the yard, I calculate that its combined seated and standing capacity is 2,094 people. So far, so easy. It's well attested that people paid a single penny to stand in the yard, and there's also some evidence of a tiered pricing structure, of paying an additional penny for a seat on a gallery bench, with a further penny required to sit closest to the stage. Following that pattern, and tracing what each audience member would have paid, I estimate that a full house at the Rose could probably yield £16 per performance. We have plenty of references in various court documents showing how this income was divided across the industry, with the playing company, here the Admiral's Men, receiving all the money from the yard plus half the gallery income, and the owner, Henslow, retaining the other half of the gallery income as rent. Because at the Rose everyone entered the gallery from the yard, the company took 77% of the total income, leaving Henslow with just 23%. The building owner would have earned vastly more if he could get people directly into the gallery from the street. And this is why, I believe, that he and Edward Alleyn decided to expand their operation in 1600 to a second theatre, the Fortune. When it comes to working out the capacity of the Fortune, there's no helpful archaeology to provide a guide, but there is the original construction contract between Henslow and Alleyn and one Peter Street, whose name may be familiar as the builder of the Globe, completed just a few months or so beforehand. The contract is very precise and outlines 2 important points. Firstly, that Street was to build separate entrances into the galleries which didn't require entry via the yard. And secondly, that it was to be square rather than a rounded polygon like the other outdoor playhouses. This had the effect of increasing the higher paying gallery spaces at the expense of the penny per person yard, and when combined with direct entry to those galleries, meant that the owner's earning potential had increased dramatically. A square building is even easier to analyse than a 15-sided polygon. So I calculate that the Fortune could have held 2,531 people, paying a total of over £18 per performance. Of this £18, Henslow and Alleyn would now keep 42.5%, whilst the Admiral's Men saw their share dip dramatically to 57.5% of the total. Henslow and Alleyn must have calculated that the near £500 outlay on the building was well worth it to effect such a huge rise in their income share. Turning now to the Chamberlain's men and their building project, the Globe. Although Peter Street brought the timbers of James Burbage's old theatre across the Thames to re-erect them a full year before the construction of the Fortune began, we can work backwards to assess the Globe's potential size, shape and therefore capacity by reference to the Fortune contract, where many elements are referred to as being like the Globe on Bankside. And there are a few fragments of archaeology to assist as well. Nothing like the scale of the Rose, but enough to work out the overall size, the sizes of the stage and the yard, and to know that it too had direct entrances to the 3 levels of gallery. It was emphatically the largest of the 3 theatres, with room for probably 2,985 people, paying a total just short of £21 per performance. Its yard was also the biggest, holding nearly 1/3 of the audience. Great for atmosphere, less good for income. At the Globe, the Chamberlain's men kept 59% of this income, whilst the owners, known as housekeepers, got 41%. So to summarise where we've got to, the Rose held just short of 2,100 people and the playing company received 77% of the income. When the Admiral's men moved from the Rose to the Fortune, the new theatre held 2,500 people, but the playing company only saw 57.5% of that income, the balance going to the owners. At the 3,000 capacity Globe, the sharers of the Chamberlain's men received 59%, whilst the owners received 41% of the income. So what does this actually mean for the individuals? For each playhouse, I'll aim to demonstrate what the different groups of personnel earned: the owners or housekeepers, the sharers in the playing company, that is, those players who shared the financial risks and rewards of the company, and their hired men, some of them players but also their support staff and stage crew, and the front of house staff who collected the pennies. In order to do this, it's necessary to estimate how frequently and regularly companies may have performed, but of course that's really impossible. But Henslow's records from slightly earlier, in the mid-1590s, do provide enough regular detail to suggest that 40 performing weeks per year is not an unreasonable number, with 6 performances per week, so this forms the basis of my estimates. Henslow's diary also provides information about the costs not only of running a venue, as you'd expect, but also of running a theatre company and putting on plays, because he regularly loaned money to the company to cash flow their production costs. The expenses of owning the building were relatively low, maybe £50 to £70 a year, to cover ground rent, a monthly licence from the Master of the Revels, and a reserve to cover repairs and maintenance and charitable donations to the parish. Whereas the company costs could easily be £500 a year to pay for commissioning perhaps 15 new plays and then getting them licensed, providing costumes and props for those same plays. The hired men, perhaps 8 actors and 4 support staff, had to be paid for 40 weeks, and the apprentice boys had to be housed and fed. All in all, a very expensive operation. But all this information enables me now to calculate a potential profit figure for a 40-week year at a range of box office percentages to arrive at my target of income figures for individuals. Now, for ease, I'll just give you examples based on 50% attendance for each playhouse, as this is probably quite close to the actual average. If the Rose played to 50% capacity for 40 weeks in any year, a sharer in the resident company might have earned as much as £93. And if he decided to stagger that across the year, he could have paid himself a weekly salary of £1.16. Now, these are very substantial figures and perhaps shed light on one motive for becoming a player and why the shares in playing companies were so jealously guarded and passed on as legacies. By comparison, a skilled worker in one of the craft guilds working a 6-day week all year round might earn £20. Even if attendance was a fairly low 30%, a sharer earned more than £30, whilst the waterman who ferried his audience across the Thames received less than a quarter of that. However, theatre then as now rarely supplies a consistent income, and to have extracted maximum benefit from the annual total would have required a degree of saving and self-discipline. The hired men of the company, meanwhile, were paid in playing weeks only, possibly even per performance. Henslow has reference to hired men's income ranging from 5 shillings to 10 shillings per week, suggesting a hierarchy of payment either on or off the stage, or possibly both. Some of the stage crew, who assisted with the ropes and pulleys in the heavens, may also have worked as riggers on the many vessels moored on the Southwark side of the Thames. Stephen Madgett, the tireman, may have been able to find freelance tailoring work, and it's possible that such a valuable company member may have received some sort of retainer from the sharers during dark periods. At least one unnamed hired man was due to receive half pay after 2 dark weeks. But those without specialist skills, most likely the hired players, would have been forced to exist on an average weekly wage of just 4 to 5 shillings for the whole year. Right at the bottom of the income distribution were the gatherers, who collected the entrance money to the playhouse. These were sought-after positions, like company shares, also bequeathed. And although there's no record of what they were paid, I believe this can be inferred from the diary. On all but 2 occasions, Henslow records his income in round shillings and sixpences, never stray pennies, suggesting in all likelihood that each gatherer was permitted to retain these odd coins. This had the potential for a maximum 5 pence per performance, perhaps 2 shillings and sixpence in a good week. Not a living wage, but useful supplementary income. At the other end of the scale, Philipp Henslow enjoyed a very comfortable existence from the Rose, even in lean years. As sole owner, at 50% capacity, he may have retained as much as £335 a year after expenses. But Playhouse income represented only one strand of his commercial interests. He was a substantial buy-to-let landlord, and his residential portfolio brought in around £200 a year. It's also likely he continued to run his original dyeing business, and he ran a pawnbroking business, which provided a low-level regular income. With all these modest income streams flowing into Henslow's hands, his combined annual profits may well have been around £700 to £800 a year. It was certainly sufficient to allow him to cash flow companies, and in some years he advanced around £500 to pay for plays, costumes, props, and cover general expenses, in addition to providing personal loans to many of the players. At the Fortune, using the same parameters of a theatre playing to 50% capacity for 40 weeks a year, and with a company with 10 sharers, the balance of profit shifted, with the owners having nearly doubled their proportion of box office income. For the hired men and gatherers, nothing changed. But the sharers of the Admiral's men, previously resident at the Rose, saw their individual income drop by perhaps £20 a year, although they were still earning a very significant £70. If the company played to less than 1/3 of capacity, there was a real danger that the sharers would be earning less than their own hired men. Hardly a happy situation for them. Was this new playhouse named in a spirit of hope and optimism? Although most likely it was for the goddess Fortuna, it is tempting to think that its owners may also have had a more pecuniary meaning in mind, as they would become the principal beneficiaries of the Fortune's income generation. Together, Henslow and Allen had the opportunity to earn more than twice as much as Henslow alone at the Rose, simply by the addition of 2 exterior staircases and 430 additional spaces on the gallery benches. With the Fortune just half filled for 40 weeks of the year, each of them could anticipate around £430 of profit, plus probably a modest £20 share in the profit of the tap house next door. For Henslow in the early years of the 17th century, this was added to around £330 from the Rose. Combined with his continuing non-theatrical interests, in these years he was almost certainly earning in excess of £1,000 a year, perhaps as much as £1,200 or £1,300, an income which propelled him to the upper echelons of the commercial world at the same level as an alderman, the most senior guild rank. Now, where the Rose had a sole owner, and the Fortune 2 joint owners, the Globe rejoiced in 7 co-owners. Cuthbert and Richard Burbage each owned 25%, and 5 of the company sharers, including Shakespeare, were now housekeepers, holding 10% each. Given the size of the globe, just short of 3,000 capacity, an annual average would have been extremely healthy at 50%, and an ordinary sharer may then have earned almost £120 a year. This was half as much again as one of his peers at the Fortune, and more than double the £50 deemed necessary in London for a comfortable living. Once again, it's easy to see how for some the perceived moral risk of being a player might be outweighed by the opportunity for financial reward. For the 5 sharers who also had a stake in the Globe itself, this reward had the potential to rise to around £215 a year. At least 2 of these sharer housekeepers, Shakespeare and Hemmings, almost certainly had additional income streams. Shakespeare's forays into property in Stratford may have provided income direct to his family resident there. He may also have received some form of cash payment for his playwriting, perhaps no more than £1 or so to add to his theatre income in some years. Like all sharers, he would also have benefited from the sporadic payments made to the company for performances at court, but this was an irregular bonus. John Hemmings probably had the chance to earn a great deal more, as he most likely ran a tap house at the first Globe as well as that recorded at the second Globe. As a member of the Grocers' Company, he was entitled to sell tobacco in addition to ale, and was therefore the obvious company candidate to run the ancillary sales. This possibly gave him an extra £170 of profit in a year, after a proportion of that profit had been shared with his fellow housekeepers. In total, in a reasonable year, Hemmings' theatre-based income perhaps approached £400 as player, co-owner and purveyor of ale and tobacco, putting him on a par with Henslow's income from either one of his playhouses. An extraordinarily good return for just a 10% share in the Globe. The other member of the Chamberlain's men achieving the same sort of income level as Hemmings was, of course, Richard Burbage, who earned more than any other housekeeper by virtue of his 25% shareholding and share in the company. With the Globe only half full, he was easily earning over £350 in an average year, whilst his elder brother Cuthbert received £240 without the necessity of performing. Such income differentials must have had an impact on the operation of the company, although the decision to invite 5 of their peers to join the ownership structure of the Globe can be seen as democratising. It was also a pragmatic method of bringing much-needed capital into the company without having to go to outside investors or look for loans at interest. The brothers could rely on outvoting their fellows in most circumstances. Only in the case of all the others aligning against them would there have been a tussle over a decision, and it's rather more likely that any disagreements were between the owner-sharers and the ordinary company sharers when priorities diverged. As at the Rose and Fortune, at very low occupancy, the sharers might have considered they would be better off cutting their losses in the city and heading off on tour. The owners, however, were still earning a reasonable income with low outgoings, whereas a dark playhouse would bring in nothing. In marginal periods, it's therefore possible that there was tension between the groups of personnel, and it's also very likely that the group, including the charismatic leading player, resident writer and business manager, usually won. So, was the professional London theatre industry at the turn of the 17th century successful in maintaining the living of its participants? For the hired men and gatherers, theatre work in the main provided only a precarious living of a few shillings a week, too subject to audience whim, seasonal fluctuation and official closure to be secure. Then as now, a secondary income may have been required to maintain individual economic stability, suggesting that the hired men were often the younger company members. The number of sharers fluctuated from company to company and from year to year, but even in a limited playing year, there was a comfortable living to be earned, probably between £50 and £120 a year, setting sharers well above many craftsmen and guild members, as well as schoolmasters and the lower ranks of the legal profession. Nevertheless, to maximise the benefit of this income, which is unlikely to have been earned in regular sums, it would have been necessary to save whenever possible and preferably to acquire property to derive rental income in the longer term to set against the vicissitudes of less good years. The main financial beneficiaries of the industry were undoubtedly the playhouse owners, whether they had inherited property as the foundation of their fortunes, such as Allen and the Burbages, or like Henslow and the player-sharer owners of the Globe, were self-made entrepreneurs. It seems likely that Henslow and Allen had a plan in their approach to the fortune, and similarly the Globe owners were guided by the Burbage brothers and perhaps Hemmings. Despite the vagaries of theatrical income, they were all earning at a level well beyond their immediate needs, enabling them to maintain comfortable establishments, buy property, invest, and fulfill their Christian duties as charitable givers and, in some cases, community leaders. As a result, all died well off, spectacularly so in the case of Allen, and represent the peak of the financial success story of the industry in parallel with its growth in respectability and status. In less than 50 years, the theatre had become professional, stable, reputable, and economically successful.